Anyway, I'm Tim Smith, and my presenters are Emily O'Carroll, who a number of years ago worked with me at KPMG, and Shweta, who currently works at KPMG. I'm the treasurer of ISACA, but for 20 years I was with KPMG, both San Diego office and KPMG International, where I worked on IT audit and risk assessments, and most recently did software development for KPMG's audit tools. Anyway, I'm going to let the two of them introduce themselves and then we'll get this thing started. So, Shweta?
Hi, everyone. I'm Shweta Shinde. I'm a director at KPMG. I started in the audit practice and now I'm in the cyber and tech risk practice. I have been with KPMG for 13 years or so and have had the pleasure of working with Tim and Emily in my time at KPMG, and I've learned from the best. So I'm very happy to be here and share the stage with them when presenting on a topic which all of us work in day in and day out.
Thank you, Shweta. Emily O'Carroll, how are you all today? Nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. And thanks to all that are joining online. Tim, Shweta, I see we have some KPMG alumni on there with us. It's such an honor today to speak with Tim and Shweta. We've all worked together over the years. For those of you that know Tim through ISACA, he was my first manager straight out of college, and I have very, very good memories of long nights in dark, hidden audit rooms where they'd shun us to the basement because that's what you often do with IT auditors. But no, in all reality, I had such a wonderful experience during my time at KPMG. I worked there from 2005 until I left in 2015. I was fortunate enough to move all over the country based on some personal circumstances. So I spent a lot of time in San Diego, the Bay Area, and Chicago, and was fortunate enough to work in many different practices within KPMG. When I started with Tim, everything was under this big umbrella we called IT advisory. And I didn't know back then, but I was doing a lot of cybersecurity work, a lot of identity work, a lot of change management, SDLC, some of what we call today DevSecOps. And it trained me very well for the role I'm in today, which I act as the field CISO for the Southwest region for GuidePoint security. Prior to that, I was the CISO at Callaway Golf and Top Golf. I had the pleasure of working there for about 10 years. So it's fun to go back to or at least to my roots and talk a little bit about the journey from and kind of the basis of IT audit and why it's so important for cyber professionals. Please ask a lot of questions, whether you're online or here in person with us today. But let's dive into the agenda. You can see what we're going to talk about if this wants to work. Uh-oh. We test and then it stops working. Hold on. I can always click through. Yeah. I'm sure it's user error. That's usually what it is. Oh, yeah. There we go. Cool. Okay. Here's our agenda. So we're going to talk about a lot about IT audit today and why it's important for cyber programs, why it's good to have that strong baseline knowledge of IT audit or partner with your IT auditors to build an effective cyber program. We're going to talk about what goes into IT audit work, how the scoping is done, how testing is performed, how you do your sampling approaches, things like that. And we're going to talk about certain qualities that are very important to being a professional IT auditor, and in my opinion, are critical in the cybersecurity function as well. Things like professional skepticism, and things like that. And what I'm most looking forward to today, and I don't want people to be shy, you see that second to last bullet point? We have some slides about complaints that we hear about IT auditors. We know they happen, and there's usually a reason for them. So with that, let's jump in a minute. Are we good? Oh, okay. All right. That light is right in my eye. If I stand here, Alex, are we good? that blue light. Right in the light. Perfect. Perfect. Is that okay? Lovely. Okay, I can see you all again, and I'm not going to go blind. Don't show me, please. All right, so let's talk for a bit about why IT audit is important for cybersecurity. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, thank you, we're trying to protect our organizations, our systems, our applications from cyber threat actors, right? From cyber attacks. IT audit, on the other hand, evaluates the effectiveness of an organization's IT systems and applications and the related controls. So they're a bit different, right? Cyber, you're trying to make sure an attack doesn't happen. And IT audit, in some ways, I'd say, is to make sure there's good governance and controls and that those controls are effective in your environment. Super important for cybersecurity professionals to understand risk management and to be able to articulate cyber risks and how they may impact the business. We're going to get into that a bit more later. But what I will say when it comes to managing risk, lean on your IT auditors. They're very, very good at identifying potential business risks and identifying and mapping controls to those risks to help an organization understand how to protect themselves. So we create things called risk and control matrices. Mapping, we're wonderful in Excel. But IT auditors have a really good understanding of how to take things that could happen and demonstrate what risk that could present to the IT organization or the business functions. Okay. Additionally, folks, especially when you're working on a financial reporting audit or a SOX audit, they have very good understanding of how IT controls translate to business impact, how they could affect financial reporting. As you grow in your cybersecurity career, most of the time, especially when you move to a leadership role, you're not meeting with technical folks to explain, to get to build a business case to get budget and things like that for the projects that your team wants to execute, right? You're explaining it to a CFO or a CEO, and to translate technical risks, cybersecurity risks into business terms is really an IT auditor's specialty, because the IT auditors are often reporting up to the CFO, the audit committee, which typically has a financial focus. So they understand how to translate better. And I find that you can leverage those folks to do so. So we have the next slide. We'll get there. There we go. All right. So this is just a side-by-side comparison. I covered a lot of these already. The first one around the differences we definitely talked about. When we talk about cybersecurity, it only takes one attack to take down a network, to take down a system, to take down an application, right? But when you're executing an IT audit, you're always thinking about it from a risk management approach. And you're also thinking, auditors also say it's not what did happen, but what could have happened. And it makes most of the IT folks or the security folks grit their teeth, because they're like, it didn't happen, so why do you care so much? Well, you're lucky this time, but it could have happened. So you need to put better controls in place to prevent it from happening in the future, right? And cybersecurity, there's ongoing evaluations and things like that. There's on the IT audit side, again, we're always looking, it's controls focused. Cybersecurity most often is looking at external threats, although insider threat programs and things like that are important too, but it's often the external cyber threat actors that we're worried about. Whereas most of the time, an IT audit is focused on your internal controls, what's happening inside your organization in the control environment. Okay. And then additionally, I think most of the time when you're looking at cybersecurity assessments and programs, you're focused on the systems and the applications and technical controls. On the audit side, it's always like what you're looking at the systems and applications that manage the data that's critical for the audit. So if it's a SOX audit, for example, a system or application will only come into scope if it's material financially to the company. Otherwise, it's most likely not going to be in scope. But if you're building a cybersecurity program, you're looking at any attack vectors where a threat actor could get in, and you have to protect all of them, right? Now, in the cybersecurity world, we do look at like what is the most critical data, we look at, from a privacy perspective, what could cause the company the most harm, but we do have to look at everything. All right, I'm going to focus on what we haven't talked about yet. There's many areas within IT audit that we can cover. The most common when you look at the external audit firms, the big four like Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, EY, and this like more mid-sized firms, Grant Thornton is one, for example. They can execute audits in all the areas that are listed there. The most common or the most frequently executed audits are SOX and financial statement audits. Whether you're public or private company. But most of those big firms also execute audits around PCI credit card data. They might do healthcare information audits for HIPAA, SOC reporting, SOC 1, SOC 2. Oftentimes I had someone come to me the other day, you used to issue these reports. Why can't you just do this for me? And in order to provide an attestation, a SOC attestation, you need to have a partner at your firm. Thank you. Sorry, I walk around a lot. That has the right certifications and things, that's a CPA, so that they can actually issue that report. Yeah, I would be doing a lot more work if I could do them myself. And then lastly, I like that last bullet point where we talk about stakeholder confidence. I think, audits are so important because if you have a strong, well-governed control environment where there's monitoring controls to make sure mistakes do not happen, it's less likely that something will slip through the cracks and things will go wrong, right? Or that there will be unauthorized changes to the balance sheets, the financial reporting, things like that. All right. Everyone awake still? Question for the group. I have a question for you. Okay. So of these on the screen here, which of these are considered risks? I'm not going to call anyone out on it, but I'm going to give you a minute to look through them and think through it in your head. Is anyone brave enough that they want to give an answer before I pull it up? All of them? All of them? Anyone else? Does Brian have a different response? All right, my friends. Trick question. None of them. Bum, bum, bum. Okay, so here's what I'll say. These are events that could occur, or they're possibly controls that could be put in place, but these do not describe the risk that it presents to the company. So yeah, you might have weak passwords or a poor password policy at your organization, but that's not your risk. The related risk is, I'm watching myself. The related risk is that someone may gain unauthorized access to the system or application that has weak passwords, right? So think about that, like what damage could be done when I'm updating a risk register, and when I would work with my teams over the years, articulating risks it's not as simple as it sounds. And I think especially when you work with a lot of engineers and architects and admins who are some of my favorite people, they just think about risk must be problem. So weak passwords is my problem. Yes, that is a problem, but that doesn't show you what risk it presents to the organization. Like think about what could go wrong if that happened. Okay, if you had open network shares, if there's an increase in cyber threat actors out there, if you don't have a business continuity plan, what could go wrong if, meteor hit San Diego? Yes, Andres. Oh, hold on. Thank you.
Hello? There.
We got
So would you say that the risk is more of like the after effect of those kind of things that we think of as a problem? So like, for instance, if we don't have a business continuity plan and all of a sudden we get hit with ransomware, we won't know what to do, right? So that's the risk. That's what you're trying to say?
you nailed it.
So what would you say? These are just considered just problems. You would say that's the way we would identify them.
Yes.
Got it.
Or
Okay.
root causes
Root
of the
causes
risk.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Right.
I just think everything.
Oh, think of what could go wrong. Thank you, Tim. Thank you. I thought I was being asked to speed it up. We are. Okay. I will say rely again, if your team is struggling to do this, rely on your internal audit teams or your IT auditors to help, because this is part of the work that goes into the planning for any audit. So they can help you articulate those better. All right. Was anyone at the FAIR chapter meeting on Monday? Can anyone tell me what the acronym FAIR stands for? I need you guys right now. ChatGPT it or something, because my notebook's over there. All right. Yeah. So FAIR is a newer methodology that talks more about risk quantification. So historically, we would talk about risks, but it was really difficult to demonstrate sometimes, especially in the IT or the cybersecurity world, what kind of impact they might have.
Thanks to Vincent online. Factor analysis of information risk.
Thank you. Factor analysis of information risk. Yes. So the FAIR Institute is an established organization now throughout the country. We have a SoCal FAIR chapter that met on Monday. They meet quarterly. Check them out. Great organization. But there's a lot of evolution around quantifying risk now. And so we look at that when we go through the risk management process. We look at what's the likelihood of something happening and what's the magnitude of something happening. And so there's a lot of different frameworks now that are helping us do this risk quantification exercise, so that you can stand in front of a CFO, for example, and say, if we don't address this risk, if we don't put controls in place to mitigate this risk, this could be the impact to our organization, however many hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of dollars. And so just like Shweta and Tim will get into in a moment, you think about the magnitude, what could it cost the company? And then what's the likely frequency of that risk occurring? So if there's the potential for it to occur weekly, monthly, annually, then you extrapolate the magnitude over that frequency. It's much more complicated than that. But if you want to talk after, we can do that. But for now, we're going to move on into the lovely world of IT audit. Am I handing it off to Shweta? Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, so we're going to do a poll right now. We're doing polls during our meetings anymore because for people with a CPA or a CIA, anything of the other certifications, there's required for a webinar to have some questions basically to show that people just don't turn on their computers and walk away. So I'm going to launch the poll and we'll go through it real quick and move on. Oops, and that's not the one I intended to launch. That's awesome. You guys are seeing me at my best today. It's pretty cool. Let's try that one. Yes. So basically asking people, whether their job skills, anybody here whose job skills, even it may not be your title, do an IT audit sort of function as part of their job? Not many. Well, maybe you'll change your mind at the end of this. Cool. Nobody's really in. Launch again. Okay. It did not launch. That's perfect. We're just having a great time here today. It's not launching. Oh, well. So yeah, there it should be on the web. No. Okay. Well, we're just going to eat that, guys. Forget it. We've had a fun time setting up today. We normally get the room quicker. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Shweta and we'll move on.
I feel like I'm covering the slide as well, but oh, there it is. Cool. So I think I'll like start talking about when do we perform IT audits. I think, whenever people think about IT audits or audits in general, the first thing that comes to mind is like external audit or just the thought that, oh, I'm going to get audited. But there is always a reason why an audit is performed, and especially when an IT audit. So that's when, we want to delve into a little bit as to what could be the triggers for this. And these are just broad categories. Not saying this is like all encompassing, but these are broadly how it can be classified. So one of the first categories is regulatory requirements. As you know, companies are subjected to a lot of regulations and requirements. So before like your regulators come in, an internal audit can be triggered or like initiated to ensure that you identify the gaps or any concerns that could be addressed prior to having a regulatory body coming and assessing you. And that helps in the sense of just kind of ensuring that you don't get fined because as you know, some of these regulatory requirements also result in hefty fines. So, and depending on the size and scale of an organization and what is the impact of that, it kind of changes as well. Other one is the internal control framework, which is obviously more popular. As I've mentioned, it is based on the risk assessment, something that Emily highlighted as well. And to identify and evaluate the health of your internal controls in place. An IT audit plays a critical role in it because it is assessing different functions within your organization to ensure that they are performing to, they have those controls which can mitigate the risks and eventually mitigate any undue actions as a result of that. Third category is post-incident review, and this is again like as something I'm more like because Emily set the stage pretty well, talking about like when a cyber incident happens or any threat incident or a security incident happens, that can further trigger an audit into internal controls because it is an input to the fact that did you have controls in place in the first place to avoid this? So that, it kind of results in doing a root cause analysis of the issue or the threat that was identified or that resulted in the security incident. So that could further kind of kind of go through your internal controls, identify if you have controls in place. If not, then what controls should be in place. So that is what the IT audit there will help with. Fourth category would be broadly like the mergers and acquisitions. And this is, everyone knows what are mergers and acquisitions. But during the due diligence process, it is important to evaluate the health of the company that you're acquiring as well, just to ensure that the next step in the process is also going to be integrating your systems. And how efficiently can you do that? How effectively can you do that? Are there risks within that company's environment that you need to address or think through as you're thinking through integration as well? And last but not the least, an increasing area of scrutiny has been around like vendor and third party, because that's an increasing area where a lot of risks and threats are identified as well, because there is an increased reliance on the use of vendors or third party for a company to kind of deliver its services effectively. And they deal with a lot of data like user data or even like for your financial data. So there needs to be an evaluation on what is happening within those organizations as well. And so that is another area of increasingly where you see IT audits, because at the end of the day, your systems are what are driving the information that results in the output of, the financial data or user data, or the health of those systems is protecting the data that flows through them. So that is when an IT audit helps in evaluating the health of those systems. Now, like, as I've spoke out, when do we do these audits? I also wanted to talk about like how do we classify, and they can be broadly classified as internal and external. And internal audits are, we have only like a couple of lines there, but it basically specifies internal audits are something that an organization is thinking initially internally and evaluating their controls periodically to ensure that they do have the right controls in place to have an effective system. And internal audits are often identified through different processes like risk management, risk assessments, or even within the second line functions through compliance functions as well. They can be very broad in range. They can range from your third party like audits to your network security, vulnerability management. Like, think about all areas which are open and potential to risk and IT threats or security incidents or security threats. And that would also come into, that would come into the purview because that would be a risk that would be identified. And then there would be a plan to kind of mitigate that risk. The second broad area is external audits, which has been our favorite topic. External audits can range again from like your financial statement audits to your SOC 2s, your SOC, the SOC reports as well, like SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, and different attestations that are performed by external. And when we say external audits, this is because an external assessor is actually evaluating your organization's controls. That would be the major distinction. Like when it is internal, it is an internal assessment of how effective your environment is. And when it is external, it is an external assessor evaluating your organization. Tim, did you want to add something? Okay. uh, Again, like from a types of audit perspective, I'm not going to go into each one of them, but obviously, like keeping our time as well in mind. But but they obviously, as I said, like there can be different ways of slicing and dicing the types of audits, but generally, you would like kind of focus it based on the area of focus. And I will just like broadly talk about like the systems and applications. As the name suggests, it is around your systems and applications within your organization. When we talk about information processing facilities, it's your data center or where your data is hosted, and all parameters around that from a security perspective to environmental perspective, those get evaluated. System development, as we all know, anytime you're developing or integrating a system within your environment, you need to ensure that there are sufficient controls as well as uh, you're thinking forward in terms of risk that the new system could like pose or how it will settle within your environment. IT and enterprise architecture, as I mentioned earlier, like something like around like your governance structure or how decisions around IT are made within your organization. So IT governance, think about like the strategies around how certain decisions around due diligence of system integrations are made. So it basically talks about IT governance as a whole. And last but not the least, telecommunications, intranet and extranet. So your network security, your what the performance of your network, and that again is important because it talks about the data going in and data going out, like your perimeter security controls, how efficiently is your data moving in through your network, as well as how well it is protected within your network. And I guess this kind of ties very well with the initial couple of slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but it basically highlights the different aspects of IT audit because I would just kind of like breaking away from our original idea of IT audits are just done during external audits, and but which is an extremely true statement. It is an important part of external audits, but at the same time, there are different factors that are considered when you're performing an IT audit, be it the data integrity, completeness and accuracy of your information, or regulations that are required to be complied with. Yeah, I think those were some of the main types. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Tim. But any questions before I hand it over to Tim?
It's okay, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there's, yeah, I'll see. Are you okay? There basically you have frameworks and standards, right? And a lot of things that IT security folks work with, like ISO and NIST, CSF, and SOC 2, those are frameworks. And then for also internal controls are covered by certain frameworks, one of which is called COSO, which is of the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. And so the thing that's important about the difference between these two frameworks are essentially guidelines. They're suggestive, whereas standards are very specific and they're prescriptive. And in a lot of cases, they do regulate how an IT audit is performed. Okay. Next slide. So COSO, I mentioned briefly, covers risks addressing three major areas of an enterprise: operational, reporting, and reporting is kind of vague, but it basically talks about financial and non-financial information is reported correctly, that there's transparency, there's timeliness, that the reporting follows the laws and regulations that apply to them. And then finally, compliance, because as time goes by with California Privacy Act and so on, you get there's a lot of compliance you have to be with. And so in each of these areas, COSO looks at 5 components of a system of internal control. So go ahead. Thanks. The control environment, which is basically the tone at the top that the business is governed correctly. Earlier, Shweta talked about and Emily talked about risk assessment. And as a result of risk assessment, knowing what your risks are, then you're going to develop control activities. And around those control activities, they need to be communicated up and down the organization or internally and externally with your various vendors and regulators. And the last step is monitoring. So it basically forms a chain. So, right, you go down and then the monitoring feeds back. Okay. So, yeah, what's a system of internal control, right? Basically, it gives you assurance about the achievement of your objectives with reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, and compliance with laws and regulations. But the important thing is that a system of internal controls is not necessarily IT centric. As Emily talked about, bringing that business knowledge in is really important. And one thing that is different with the internal and external audit is a lot of time the external audit really addresses the reliability of the data produced by the systems versus just the protection of the systems per se. Yes? Okay. So there are 5 steps. One's like initiation of a transaction, for example, that an economic event needs to be recorded. Authorization is a big one we all look at, right? Who should be able to put this stuff in the system? Who shouldn't be able to touch it? Recordation, really relates to change control in a sense, right? Because transactions have to be placed in the correct bucket so people can report correctly. Processing, again, kind of looks to change control in a way because you have to set up transactions that flow through certain accounts and get calculated the right way. And then finally reporting that the stakeholders get a clear, accurate position of financial performance and regulatory compliance. Thanks. So who specifies what to audit, right? Like I said, frameworks tell us what risks to address, but they don't tell us how to do it. And these risks often may vary by company or geographic location or industry. Standards, like I said before, are very specific sometimes. And so in the case of financial statement audits, there's two bodies that basically prescribe how we do the financial audits and how we do the work around the IT system that support them. Okay. So anybody's heard the PCAOB? Yeah. Some of my friends, I got to tell you. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, they regulate accounting firms that for any publicly held company. And so as long as you have shares or bonds on a market, your accounting firm that does your work needs to be registered with the PCAOB. And then they go around and they go select the registered firms and go select a sample of audits and reviews them very, very, very closely for quality and such. And then they go to the firms and make sure the firms at a high level are doing the right things. And so a member firm, say of KPMG in the United Kingdom and the United States and China are doing the work the same way and are still complying with regulations. And it's a very interesting thing to go out and read the inspection reports. Those are publicly available because you can learn, what deficiencies they're finding and what controls might need to be picked up by your own people. Okay. And then for non-publicly held companies, their audits are regulated by the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And they set the accounting rules, including SOC 2, by the way. PCAOB does not govern SOC 2 for non-public companies, but they don't regulate accounting firms per se. Rather, accounting firms are licensed on a state basis. And so their inspection is done by peer review committees, which are other CPAs in practice in that state. And they basically do the same thing the PCAOB does. And if they find deficiencies, minor deficiencies, you work on correcting yourself over time. But if it's major stuff, they may actually have the state pull your license to practice, and then you can't audit anymore. Okay. You were going to do this one.
So I think the next part, like as Tim talked about, like what are the identifiers or who governs it. But then when we are talking about how do we determine what to audit within an organization, who can answer maybe like how do you determine what to audit within an organization? What would be the process that you guys follow within your organization to identify audits?
Depending on the framework, but usually I start with like a data flow chart to kind of follow the data to kind of see what needs to be audited. And then from there, I build boundaries around that if necessary. Unless it's something like ISO, then I do the whole organization because that sucks.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's an important part of it. And then the other part we wanted to highlight was risk assessments, an enterprise risk assessment, as you might have heard about, like this term being used a lot, like this came about through a risk assessment. But what is it? So risk assessment is basically what drives your audit or, your internal audit plan for the year in terms of what are the risks that the organization is seeing in the current landscape. And these keep on changing, right? Your risks are not constant. every year with every change that happens, your risks keep on evolving and changing. So an organization, what like they think about like, oh, what are the risks? How do I try to address these risks? So that is what results in a formulation of an IT, not only IT actually, audit plans basically, because this is the risks are identified through various discussions with your different stakeholders within the organization, or what you see outside in the landscape or the industry that you're operating in. And based on that, you try to identify how what addresses or what can address those risks, because you're trying to do a lot of things proactively rather so as to avoid things to be done reactively. So that is when the risk assessment helps in terms of identifying what the overall landscape that the company is operating in, and then what audits or what controls do you need to be performed to then address those risks effectively. If anything were to get exploited, you have a plan beforehand. And then that results into like prioritization. You kind of risk rank them. There's a whole process, and not going into all those details, but basically that what helps in deriving an audit plan, which is then implemented by the organization, especially within an internal audit function, to then go through and perform those audits within an organization. Um, and having said that, I will again hand it to Tim.
Okay, so what do they look at, right? What do we look at once we figured out the processes and done our risk assessment? First of all, information processing controls, also known as application controls, right? So they control the processing of IT applications and in some instances, manual information processes. And some examples are, for example, role-based access control, configuration of how transactions process, or maybe configuration, excuse me, configuration of report writers. So go ahead. So on top of that, though, we also look at the IT general controls, right? Because above the applications, who has access to your network as per se? That's not an application. Or change control. How do you do change control across your environment? Because those are going to affect your application controls. Who can make the change to where a particular transaction posts? And so some classic examples are access controls at network level, change management, like I mentioned, or DevOps and SDLC. You guys all know this, so I don't need to go over that. Yeah, so what are some issues that can happen in the application controls? Had a client where, excuse me, they use Siebel for their sales order system, and then Siebel dumped into a network server overnight, and then eventually that system, that information was then passed into the accounting system. Well, there was a guy in accounts receivable manager who had right access to that network share, and it was just ASCII data. And so he made a few changes so that when the stuff dumped into the accounting system and was analyzed later, it made it look like he was clearing the receivables faster than he really was, so we could get cash awards. So that was pretty slick. Okay, second, had another client with the JD Edwards. It was a computer equipment company, and JD Edwards and a lot of accounting systems have secondary addresses in their vendor master file, or in JD Edwards, it's called the address book. Anyway, I had one place where somebody was flipping the delivery address on some of the shipments so that her garage got a lot of nice IT equipment. And the customers still got billed. Yeah. And the last one, for example, is which users can create and approve journal entries. In the first year of SOX, I had a company that, Sarbanes-Oxley for all you accounting fans. I had a guy who was the database administrator. And basically, I watched him create journal entries in the database and then have them get accepted by the accounting system. And he was not supposed to be creating journal entries, needless to say. I wanted to make it a material weakness, but the audit partner wouldn't let me do it. Okay, so we're just not, the biggest complaint y'all might have is, oh God, it's a checkbox audit. And that's not the case at all, really, right? because first we test the controls, and first of all we test to see if it's designed effectively. Will it detect and correct an error if an error or problem is encountered? If it passes that test, then we test to see if it actually does it. And that's a big deal. And we test multiple times. We test at a point in time, which is usually the fiscal year end. And we test during the period to make sure things are consistent across the year. Yeah. So go ahead with the control. Yeah. So inquiry, these are the different ways we test controls. We ask about it. We ask about how it was designed, how people operate it. However, as evidence in an audit, we can't use inquiry alone because it's he said, she said. Recalculation. We go through and pick transactions and reperform the calculation to make sure the system is doing that correctly. And then we'll take a look at change control to make sure that recalculation or the calculation as a whole has not changed or changed properly during the period. Confirmation. We don't do a lot of that in IT audit. What that means is when the auditor says, okay, you're showing $3 million in accounts receivable, we're going to send out letters, not from you, but from us as the auditor, to the different people that owe you that money and confirm with them that they truly owe you that much. Okay. But on an IT side, you really don't have any reason to do that. Inspection. We look at the output, basically, right? And that may be output of manual controls like reconciliations, or we actually run reports and take a look at the reports, take a look at queries. That's a big one on access control testing. Okay. Observation, we go around and we watch people perform the controls that they basically do what the control was designed to do rather than they tell us one thing and do it another way. And lastly, reperformance. We may go through and take a sample of, I don't know, invoices, for example, and we may actually reperform the whole process of creating the accounts payable or a subset of the accounts payable ledger. And that helps us determine that it's complete and accurate. And finally, analytical review. We take a look at things that are related to each other in the accounting sense, like sales and cost of goods sold, or depreciation, assets and depreciation expense. And we look over time to see that the relationships between them are fairly consistent, unless there's a reason that maybe the company made some changes, bought some new property and so on, because that helps us know at a high level, things are reasonably in the ballpark or they're way the hell out of the ballpark. Okay. So we won't talk about how testing is performed on individual controls specifically, but we just wanted to give you some information. We're going to give you some information about the characteristics and attributes of audit evidence that we're required to get by the standards we follow, so you can understand why we ask for such specific things, and we sometimes ask it multiple times. Okay. So one of the aspects we have to present is professional skepticism. Basically, it's independence. It's basically saying that you have a questioning mind. You don't necessarily take things at face value. You do a critical assessment. You go, does this make sense? And you look for, like, for example, possible bias. I guess that accounts receivable manager might have had, some bias. And like I said, we don't take things at face value. Okay. So the attributes of appropriateness and sufficiency is what we look for. And by appropriateness, that's easier for you to say. Is this, somebody gives us some evidence, does it really relate to what we're trying to measure here, for example? And then sufficiency, is it enough? If you give us, your accounts receivable, you give us 1 month of accounts receivable, that's not going to do it. We're going to have to take a look across the year because it's a summation effect. So so two characteristics are evaluated by these attributes, right? Relevance and reliability, including its source. And we tend to give greater weight and reliability to information from outside the company, right? That's the old confirmations thing. Or, for example, yeah, I think that's good enough for the moment. And we really look, and it's very important to get all the evidence you get. Is everything agreeing with itself, or is there an outlier over here that basically says something different? It's really important to follow that up, because that could be the thread you pull that may get you something. Whether it's sufficiently precise and detailed, we often need to get the query. When you guys give us something, we need to get the query created to provide the information you give us. And we need evidence of the accuracy and completeness. So we get that query, for example, and look for certain exclusion statements or something. We need something. If we need the universe, we need the universe. Yeah, and like I said, that also applies to IT about information either provided by or about IT systems. Okay. So the bottom line, kick it. If it ain't documented, it didn't happen. That's kind of the way it is. Okay. Here we go, your favorite part, common complaints. Kick it. Okay, so the auditor does not know our systems. That's one, yeah. The auditor wants not only the data, but how it was obtained. And the auditor is here multiple times a year. Holy crap. So let's look at the first one. So here's the deal, right? When you're working at the company, you focus on those systems day in and day out. When we're coming in from like KPMG or Deloitte or whatever, we go to multiple clients who have different systems, who have different business structures. So we're not going to have the depth of knowledge you have, but you help explain it to us and we will understand. Okay. Yeah. So why do we want how it was obtained as well? We need to know how, or we can't speak to accuracy and completeness. That's why we want that query. We don't just want the dump. You know, makes sense when you think about it. Yeah. So we're here multiple times a year. We're required to do that. We look at information at a point in time. We may come in every quarter and look at that quarter, and then come in another quarter, maybe another quarter, and then especially at year end. So we have to look at that so we can, because things change during the course of the year. The business changes, new things happen. Okay. Anybody? Okay, yeah. So why won't the auditor take what I say at face value? Why is that? Yeah, I love it. This man talks to me. He says professional skepticism. I love that. And so can I provide direct? Yeah, so there it is. Hey, you nailed it. How about this one? Can I provide direct assistance in audit testing since I know the systems? Here's the audit answer. It depends. Okay. In the internal audit, right? Since they're part of the company, that's not a problem, generally speaking. When you're external audit, it seriously depends. Because if I'm working in a system and if I'm in a client and I work with internal audit, I know that they have the professional skepticism thing down. But still, they have to follow my instructions. Now, if somebody just from IT comes up and says, here's this report, no, because that might be, how you treat the auditors may be part of your performance appraisal. I don't know. Anyway, another important thing to think about is if you say you leave a company and then you go work somewhere else, and then that company says, hey, why don't you come in and help us on our SOX audit? That's not going to happen because you were too close to that company last year. So we kind of say, no, thanks, appreciate it. Okay. And that's basically it. So any questions or comments or thoughts?
More complaints.
More
complaints.
I'll try to address them. I only did this for 20 years.
I have a
Complaint.
question. So what's the most terrifying thing that you've seen from an audit perspective without naming any clients?
Oh, okay. Yeah. 2 weeks before year end, I had a client with Great Plains, Microsoft Great Plains accounting system, update their system 2 weeks before the end of the year that reset all the security back to baseline. That was pretty sweet. Yeah, and then another one. Emily, you can tell the other one. Yeah. There you are.
Yeah, so I think this is a great one, an example. Tim was talking about why we audit multiple times a year. So I was at a client. This was probably 20 plus years ago. Tim was the manager. I was traveling to this client and I was there for about a week. And I was on site for only a week, although we were performing testing throughout the year. And I'm in the break room getting coffee or lunch or something. And a gentleman on the IT team says, our head of IT, our director, he did a massive cleanup of all the access before you got here, right? He told us this is a mess. We have terminated users everywhere. We have to clean this up. So that auditor skepticism, and also, it also, you don't want to be seen as the bad guy as the auditor, that people just want to kick you out. Like it is good to build relationships at your clients, especially as the external auditor. So when you're coming in for that third party audit, because had I come in and demanded things and slammed my request list on the table, like they may not have felt as welcome to share this information with me. But then I also had a professional responsibility to report that up. I could have just swept it under the rug because it would have made my audit a lot easier. I would have been out of there a lot earlier. But I remember I was probably 23 years old and I'm up in Northern California calling Tim down here and got the audit partner on the phone. And we talked about what do we do about this? And that's where, again, I'm going to tie it back to we kind of harped today on getting the source of the data, the queries for the data, the raw data, not just like having the client, or if you're doing an internal audit, your team members in the IT department that are providing evidence, not just having them format it in whatever way they want. You have to get the source data so that you can verify that the audit is complete and it's accurate and it hasn't been modified by whoever the control owner is. I also wanted to point out for the internal audits, there is also independence requirements for internal audits. So if you are involved in a control, for example, if you run the vulnerability management program at your company, Mirpon, so Mirpon, we worked together at Callaway, kind of, and he's executing a lot of cybersecurity controls. It would not be appropriate for him also to audit and test those controls. So although it's an internal audit and you have internal employees executing the testing and executing the audit, they need to be completely independent from that control. Yeah, Neil.
Yeah. Is it on? Yes, no, maybe. Okay. Along those lines, you have companies doing multiple audits a year. You just mentioned about independence, about an internal audit. What do you guys, one of the terms or phrases that I'm familiar with is relying on the work of others.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys rely on the work of others?
Yeah. Yeah, SOX came around probably after the first 2 or 3 years. Yeah, companies were complaining that it's too much work, and we have internal audit working for us, and so yeah, it became very important after SOX year 2 or 3 to rely, and so we rely on internal audit, but like I said before, we give them their marching orders and such, but they do the work, and they may do it throughout the year, and we'll use their work, that they've done throughout the year. But it did cut costs substantially. It may not look like it, but it does. Oh, absolutely. No, but I mean, no, but we'll take a sample of their work, but they may go in and do a much larger sample. We'll just do a very small statistical of theirs. Yeah.
To determine which controls you can rely on, again, it goes back to risk management, taking a risk-based approach. If it's a very high risk control or it's a control that had issues or deficiencies in the prior year, the external audit firm may say we cannot rely on that control.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that, yeah, it also depends. Like that is the famous answer that comes out, but it really depends. Exactly. But it just depends also if it's a first year audit versus, year on year experience, because the internal audit is also evaluated for their skill set and their background, just to make sure that they are performing those assessments accurately or like, completely enough. So there are different factors that are considered from relying on work of the others. You, yeah.
Mike.
Bye.
Hey, give me the mic.
I remember that, David.
I remember, and the primary reason for the reliance of the work of others is it's a cost perspective. The markets pushing on the SEC and pronouncements coming out of the AICPA says you must rely on the work of others in order to reduce costs to the corporations. So that's why. But like you said, those controls that are considered critical, a little bit less reliance and do much of your own work with respects to the reliance on the work of others. Ensure that there are sufficient controls in place and sufficient oversight in place to ensure objectivity of the work.
Cool. We've got some questions from folks online. Oh, go ahead, Lucy, please.
Thank you. So, Tim, you mentioned earlier that as an auditor, an IT auditor, especially if you're external one, it's impossible for you to know everything, right? Because you have different companies, different systems. So we don't have a lot of IT auditors in the room based on the question someone asked to raise their hand. What advice would you give to IT auditors to stay on top of what's happening? I mean, the topic today is IT audits and introduction to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is wide, is huge, right? So what advice do any of you have for IT auditors to do to stay on top of trends and what is happening and don't lose their focus to make them excellent IT auditors?
After going home every night or during the weekends after my audits, I would read like crazy. And that's the name of the game. Especially, well, now there's so much online, but I used to read Journal of Association of Computing Machinery, for example, which is cutting edge IT stuff. Reading for audit, I'd have them read the PCOB inspection reports. There's a lot in there that they'll find out. It won't name the clients, but it'll name the accounting firm that screwed up. But it's reading and taking and keeping your CPE up, and you kind of know what an audit's about. You just have to keep up with, there's this new accounting system, there's this new that. You kind of follow the big picture that you might see on even IT news items on the web. Okay. And follow ISACA, there's a lot of good stuff in ISACA's, homepage and courses you can take. Janie? Sorry to the people online, just hold on 1 minute.
Thank you, Tim. My question is that given all the development of AI agents, that do you think IT auditors' life will be easier or actually harder? And also, do you see the demand of not as experienced people will be even drop significantly or not really?
When I see how organizations or the audit firms are integrating AI into their testing and their documentation, it seems to me like the early days of when we started offshoring things, the more repetitive activities that are performed in the audit are the most likely the things that you can train the AI models on. And so those are most likely what will be handed off to AI. But just like an intern or a more junior employee, they need oversight. And so I always think of it as that allows audit professionals to have more time for the more interesting work. So I don't think people need to be scared. I think they need to embrace it. But going back to Lucy's question as well, from a technical perspective, I remember when I was starting out, if you're earlier on in your career, make sure that you have a strong baseline understanding of the different layers of IT. So have a good broad understanding of the different types of operating systems, Linux, Windows, databases as well, because you're going to see those across many organizations, many clients. But if you try to understand the IT controls for every single application out there, you're going to drown. You can't do that. So if you're working in an external audit function or if you're working at an organization, think about where the needs are. Like focus on one of the big accounting system, the big ERP systems like SAP or Oracle to specialize in. And then you may have to shift throughout your career depending on what organization you're working for. But that would be my advice.
I would just add that that's very true. But the fun thing is also when you're in public, you can range all the way from QuickBooks up to SAP and Oracle and everything in between. So sometimes you may have to get a hold of somebody else. In the bigger firms, it's good. You can get a hold of somebody else who knows that system and get them on your team or get advice from them. So you can reach out. It's like that old TV game show, you know? So.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on the AI piece is that it definitely is helpful because in my day-to-day also I see that with my teams as well, I see that. But I think it's also adding a layer of complexity and that we have to address as well from an AI trust and governance perspective. Because because there is a big demand right now to use AI in different processes. And that is also from the client in terms of automating their controls or installing continuous monitoring. But that comes with its own ecosystem around the AI, right? Like you have to evaluate. So it definitely is helpful. It is an area that we have to embrace, as Emily mentioned. But it's also an area of growth and opportunity to learn more and to seek, where we can do better in terms of governance of AI.
If I may add a little bit about AI as well, Lucy Maxwell, membership director for the San Diego chapter here. I would like to share, in case you're not aware, that ISACA is currently developing a certification on artificial intelligence. Back in April 2025, we did a beta exam for people because we want to make sure that we are really attacking what is needed for artificial intelligence. So we did a beta test for the certification. So that's a certification that is coming to be offered by ISACA. So more to come on that.
I'm good. I'm just thinking about that because given the current environment that in terms of for higher education, because Becca and I are both with universities, and then just kind of want to know that what's your expectations for students today, undergrad, accounting major, MIS major, or even computer science major, and what do you think will be really best equip them for their professional life?
That's a that's a loaded question. I would say there's I think the main thing that comes down to with advent of these technologies is also, as an IT auditor, which we touched upon was the professional skepticism, your critical thinking, the problem solving skills. Those are not going to go away. That is always going to stay and be more relevant than ever right now, because that is what is going to be a differentiator. So these tools are there to help you, to make you learn easier and faster. But at the same time, there is a layer of complexity that they add, which is required, and for which critical thinking, that is required. And that comes with understanding the basics as well. So I think
So let me be really fast. One thing that I really doubt about is like, for example, say I'm a computer science major. I'm really good with AI and all these other things, really great with critical thinking and all the problem solving skills, right? Am I actually qualified to work for a CPA firm and then just learn accounting or anything about what you just talked about today super fast? Or say that may not be. So my question is really regarding, in addition to all these skill set and whatever you mentioned about, how important the domain knowledge is.
Oh, absolutely. I would think, right? I mean, that's the only way to call BS on the AI, right? So to speak. Yeah, you got to know it. I mean, I remember when I was working with some guys and they had a deficiency and they got the flip of the um, debit and credit wrong when they wrote the thing to the auditors and say this is wrong, and the auditors go, "You guys don't know what you're talking about." That was not a good look.
And again, it's a very evolving landscape, so we don't know how it will be in the next 5 years. It's changing a lot. But I would say, like, as working for KPMG, I've worked with a lot of engineers now as well. So yeah, folks with computer science, if they're welcome, because yeah, we are working on technologies and we are trying to implement technologies for our client as well. So those skill set are actually very useful even at an accounting firm. Like, the accounting firms are not traditionally only accounting now. We've moved so much into advisory and consulting. It's, it is changing. It has changed a lot over the last few years and it's continuously evolving. So I resonate with you. It's definitely a concern. We'll have to see how it plays out, but yeah, it's currently evolving.
Okay, cool. So some of the questions that we received online, the first one is someone that's new to the field would like to reach out to you all for as potentially being a mentor. If you're open to
There
that,
they are.
there you go. Look at that. And we will have a copy of the slide deck available on the website afterwards, along with a copy of the video. So of the recording to make that available. Let's see what we got next.
Yeah,
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just a lot of people saying great job. Thank you. And stuff like that. So
Thank you.
thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you sharing everything that you did. And thanks everybody for coming and sticking around for everything.